At 11:14 a.m. on May 10, 1945, First Lieutenant Robert Klingman's eyes strained against the blinding sun at 13,000 feet above the East China Sea. His F4U Corsair, along with three others from Marine Fighter Squadron 312, patrolled the skies north of Okinawa. Below, the sprawling American fleet lay vulnerable. For weeks, the Japanese had perfected a deadly formula. A high-flying Kawasaki Ki-45 Nick reconnaissance plane would photograph fleet positions with impunity, then guide devastating kamikaze strikes that had already sent 12 ships to the bottom. The twin-engine Nick operated at 35,000 feet, a sanctuary altitude believed to be beyond the reach of American interceptors. Every photo it took would translate into more burning hulls and oil-slicked waters. When radar at Kadena Airfield painted a lone bogey approaching from the north at 25,000 feet, the mission was clear: stop it at all costs. Flight leader Captain Kenneth Rauser's order crackled over the radio. "Drop tanks and lighten up. We're going after him." The four Corsairs jettisoned their external fuel tanks, the bulky cylinders tumbling away toward the ocean. Then came the next, more extreme command: fire off your ammunition. To claw their way up to the Nick, they needed to shed every possible pound. Klingman squeezed his trigger, sending 2,000 rounds of .5 caliber ammunition, 687 pounds of weight, harmlessly into the sea. The other pilots followed suit. Their Corsairs, now frighteningly light and nearly defenseless, pointed their noses upward and began a desperate, grinding climb against physics and time. They were stripping themselves of every safeguard to reach a target that had always been untouchable. The race against the reconnaissance clock had begun, and the price of failure would be measured in sunken ships. The climb became a battle against the atmosphere itself. As the two remaining Corsairs, flown by Captain Rauser and Lieutenant Klingman, pushed past 25,000 feet, the thin, frigid air starved their mighty Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engines. The superchargers screamed, forcing oxygen into the cylinders, but power dropped precipitously. Below, the other two pilots reported crippling engine trouble and were forced to break off, leaving only Rauser and Klingman to continue the agonizing ascent. They pushed their throttles past the emergency war power gate, a wire never meant to be broken in flight. Cylinder head temperatures buried their needles in the red, and the smell of scorched oil seeped into the cockpits. At 36,000 feet, they reached the Corsair's official service ceiling. The Nick, a dark speck against the endless blue, was still climbing, now at 38,000 feet. Defying every manual and engineering specification, Rauser and Klingman followed, their aircraft groaning in protest. Here, the air was so thin that control surfaces turned sluggish and unresponsive. A sharp turn would bleed their precious energy and send them into an unrecoverable stall. They were flying on the edge of a coffin corner, where the margin between controlled flight and a fatal spin was measured in mere knots. For 20 excruciating minutes, they nursed their shrieking engines, watching the enemy aircraft slowly grow larger in their windscreens. Finally, at 38,000 feet, a staggering 3,000 feet beyond the Corsair's design limit, Rauser closed in. With his remaining ammunition, he fired a furious burst that shredded the Nick's right engine, sending flames and black smoke pouring from its cowling. The damaged reconnaissance plane slowed but flew on stubbornly with its left engine. Rauser's guns then fell silent. He was out of ammunition. It was now Klingman's turn. He slid into the perfect firing position, 50 feet behind the wounded Nick.
He ignored the tracers from the Japanese rear gunner stitching holes in his wing, placed his pipper on the enemy aircraft, and squeezed his trigger. Nothing happened. He squeezed again. Silence. In the -40°C cold of the stratosphere, the mechanisms of his 6.50 caliber machine guns had frozen solid. He was now sitting directly behind a critically important enemy plane, having risked everything to reach it, with no way to shoot it down. The Nick, damaged but still flying, began to pull away, carrying its vital photographs toward home.
Time seemed to freeze, along with his guns. In the span of a heartbeat, First Lieutenant Robert Klingman processed his catastrophic reality. The Japanese reconnaissance plane, its mission critical to the kamikaze campaign, was escaping. He had no ammunition, and his straining Corsair couldn't climb higher. The traditional solutions, breaking off or forcing a bailout, meant complete mission failure and condemned unknown sailors to death. His eyes fell on the spinning disc of his four-bladed Hamilton Standard propeller, a blur of polished metal slicing through the thin air. A desperate, insane idea crystallized. He keyed his radio, his voice calm against the roar of wind and engine. "I'm going to use my prop." Captain Rouser, flying nearby, understood immediately. There would be no debate. Klingman advanced his throttle, climbing a few hundred feet above the lumbering Nick. He positioned his Corsair like a hawk, aligning for a strike. The Japanese rear gunner, seeing the menacing silhouette above, swiveled his weapon upward, sending a final stream of tracers that ripped through the Corsair's right wing. Klingman ignored the impacts. He nosed over into a shallow dive, aiming the whirling arc of his propeller directly at the Nick's vertical stabilizer. The collision was not a blunt impact, but a horrific grinding shriek of metal on metal at 300 miles per hour. The propeller blades, spinning at over 2,000 revolutions per minute, chewed into the Nick's aluminum tail like a circular saw. Pieces of the rudder and stabilizer exploded into the slipstream, pelting the Corsair's windshield with debris. The Nick shuddered violently, and for a second, Klingman thought it would break apart. But as he pulled up, his own aircraft convulsed with a terrifying, violent vibration. The propeller was badly damaged. At least one blade was bent backwards. The Nick, wounded and trailing debris, remained airborne. The gunner was dead or incapacitated, his position shattered, but the pilot maintained control on his single remaining engine. The first strike had failed to deliver a killing blow. Klingman's daring gamble had turned his plane into a weapon, but it was a weapon now blunted and failing. He was no longer just a pilot in a dogfight. He was a man committed to a brutal physical duel in the sky, and his opponent was still flying.
The Corsair bucked in his hands like a wild animal, the vibration from the mangled propeller threatening to shake the entire airframe apart. Klingman fought the controls, his vision blurred by the shuddering instrument panel. He had to finish this. With a burst of throttle that sent fresh plumes of black smoke from his overheating engine, he climbed for a second pass. The Nick, now visibly crippled and trailing smoke from its dead engine, was trying to maintain a desperate, slow flight north. Klingman aligned himself higher and to the side, then dove once more. This time, he aimed not for the stabilizer, but for the root of the tail section where it joined the fuselage, the spine of the aircraft. The remaining Japanese gunner, battling a shattered canopy in hurricane-force wind, managed to fire a defiant, wild burst before the Corsair's whirling propeller disc chewed through the rear cockpit entirely, silencing the weapon and its crewmen in a spray of debris. The Nick pitched violently, but held together. The cost to Klingman was immense. 2 propeller blades were now bent almost flat against the cowling, and a 6-inch piece of a third blade had sheared off completely. The vibration became a deafening, bone-jarring roar. He had one last chance before his own aircraft tore itself to pieces. Ignoring the screaming gauges and the smell of burning metal, Klingman willed his faltering Corsair above the Nick one final time. He was no longer just a pilot. He was a part of the machine, an extension of its last brutal purpose.
He pushed the stick forward into a near-vertical dive, aiming the center of his spinning, broken propeller at the precise junction where the tail met the fuselage. The impact was catastrophic. In a shower of aluminum splinters and a deafening metallic shriek, the Corsair's propeller severed the tail assembly clean off. The Japanese aircraft immediately pitched forward into an uncontrolled tumbling dive toward the Pacific, 15,000 feet below. No parachutes emerged. The reconnaissance photos and the crew were gone. The kamikaze coordinators would get no intelligence from this flight. In the sudden silence that followed the destruction, the unexpected twist revealed itself. Klingman had won, but his own aircraft was now a flying wreck. The victorious hunter was stranded at the edge of space in a crippled machine, with a seized engine and a 70-mile glide over open oceans separating him from survival.
Victory at 38,000 feet felt indistinguishable from catastrophe. The moment Klingman's propellers sheared off the Knick's tail, his own Corsair was engulfed in a violent, shaking chaos. The unbalanced, mangled propeller created forces the airframe was never designed to withstand. The control stick bucked wildly in his hands, and the entire aircraft groaned as if about to disintegrate. With the enemy destroyed, his only mission now was to avoid following it into the sea. He chopped the throttle to idle, reducing the catastrophic vibration to a severe, constant shudder. His engine, pushed beyond all limits for over an hour, was finished. Oil pressure plummeting, temperatures pegged in the red, black smoke streaming from the cowling. He was now the pilot of a 10,000-pound glider, 70 miles from home over the open Pacific, with a frozen, lifeless engine and a propeller that was no longer a tool of flight, but a dead, dragging anchor of twisted metal. Klingman's mind shifted from hunter to survival calculator. He trimmed the Corsair for its best glide ratio, aiming the nose toward the distant smudge of Okinawa. Every pound of altitude was now a convertible currency into distance. Captain Rouser, his own Corsair low on fuel but still flying, took up position on his wing, a silent guardian. The calculations were grim. With no engine, a damaged airframe creating extra drag, and a dead propeller that refused to windmill, his glide range was a terrifying unknown. The wind, his fuel state, even the rising heat of the day would tip the balance between reaching Kadina's runway or ditching in the shark-infested waters. As he began the long, silent descent, an unexpected and chilling realization set in. The most dangerous part of the mission was not the combat at the edge of space, but the agonizing, powerless journey home. His fate was no longer in the hands of skill or courage, but in the unforgiving laws of physics and a rapidly diminishing altimeter.
The runway at Kadena Airfield stretched out before him, a thin gray ribbon of hope against the Okinawan landscape. As Klingman descended through 1,000 feet, his silent glide became a precise and terrifying calculus. His hydraulic pressure was almost gone. He pulled the landing gear handle, and with a reluctant groan, the nose and right main gear locked down. The left main gear, however, only partially extended, its indicator glowing a menacing red. He was coming in on 2.5 wheels. Crash trucks and fire engines scrambled along the runway's edge, their crews a stark reminder of the expected outcome. Klingman's mind cleared of everything but the mechanics of survival. He adjusted his approach with gentle slips, fighting the asymmetric drag of his ruined propeller. A crosswind threatened to push him offline, but a too steep correction could stall the wounded Corsair. He was not just landing a plane, he was balancing on the knife edge of physics, where every input had to be perfect, and the price of a single error was a fiery cartwheel at over 70 knots. The threshold passed beneath him. He flared, holding the Corsair off the concrete as long as he dared, letting speed bleed away. The right wheel touched first with a chirp of rubber, then the nose gear. The partially extended left gear slammed down with a jarring crunch, and the Corsair immediately veered left.
Klingman stomped on the right rudder pedal and applied opposite brake, muscles straining to keep the careening aircraft on the centerline. With no engine power or propeller drag to help slow him, he stood on the brakes, the tires shrieking and smoking as the end of the runway rushed toward him. The crash trucks raced alongside, keeping pace with his deceleration. In a final cloud of smoke and the smell of scorched rubber, the Corsair shuddered to a stop with just 300 feet of pavement remaining. The silence that followed was only broken by the ticking of cooling metal. As ground crews swarmed the aircraft, their faces transformed from anticipation of a disaster to awe at the pilot who had just walked away from it. The unexpected twist came not in the landing, but in the inspection that followed. The maintenance chief took one look at the propeller, blades bent into grotesque shapes, one sheared off, and the oil-drenched, seized engine, and declared the Corsair a total loss. Klingman had not only destroyed a Japanese reconnaissance plane with his propeller, he had also, in the process, completely destroyed his own aircraft, and survived.
The intelligence debriefing that followed was as meticulous and probing as the mission was reckless and brilliant. In a makeshift tent at Kadena, officers listened in stunned silence as Klingman, with Captain Rauser corroborating every detail, recounted the 3 propeller strikes at 38,000 feet. The story of the frozen guns, the calculated decision to ram, and the severed tail section was verified and entered into the official record. The impact was immediate and twofold. Tactically, the mission was dissected. It proved both the extreme vulnerability of high-altitude reconnaissance and the shocking lengths to which American pilots would go to protect the fleet. For this, Klingman was recommended for the Navy Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. The citation would immortalize his conspicuous gallantry and utter disregard for personal safety. Yet the true, unexpected recognition came not from the brass, but from his fellow pilots and ground crew. To them, the battered Corsair, soon stripped for parts, became a sacred relic. Klingman was no longer just another pilot. He was the man who had turned his plane into a blade and won. The war in the Pacific ended just 3 months later, but Robert Klingman's service was far from over. He chose to remain in the Marine Corps, his legendary mission now a part of his record, but not the definition of his career. When the Korean War erupted in 1950, he deployed not as a fighter pilot, but in the equally vital and dangerous role of a forward air controller. On the frozen ground alongside infantrymen, he directed close air support strikes, using the skills honed in the sky to save lives on the ground. The man who had improvised a weapon at the edge of space now carefully marked targets with smoke, talking nervous young jet pilots onto enemy positions mere yards from friendly troops. This second act of service, earning him an Air Medal, revealed the deeper, untwisted truth of his character. The same relentless determination that drove him to a desperate ramming attack was channeled into precise, life-preserving coordination. The ultimate recognition of his May 10th mission was not that it ended his story, but that it was merely the most dramatic chapter in a lifelong commitment to service.
Robert Klingman's life after his Navy Cross mission unfolded not as a continuous saga of public glory, but as a quiet testament to the long, unassuming service of a generation. He remained in the Marines for a total of 32 years, retiring as a lieutenant colonel in 1966. He flew in the jet age, trained new pilots, and in a poignant full circle even became a forward air controller in Korea, meticulously directing strikes from the ground to protect others, a far cry from his solitary duel in the stratosphere. Settling in Hawaii, he earned a civilian pilot's license, his love for flying undimmed by the trauma of war. He rarely spoke of May 10, 1945. To his family and friends, he was a devoted husband, a private man, and a dedicated Marine.
His medals, including the nation's second highest award for valor, were stored away, not displayed. The epic battle, it seemed, might have been destined to fade into the obscure footnotes of squadron histories, remembered only by a few veterans and aviation enthusiasts. Yet the sheer audacity of his act refused to be buried. Military historians, sifting through combat reports and citations, repeatedly stumbled upon the account of the pilot who rammed a reconnaissance plane with his propeller at 38,000 feet. The story began to resurface, celebrated not just for its raw courage, but for its profound tactical implications. It became a cornerstone lesson in naval aviation, a testament to pilot ingenuity under impossible conditions, the incredible durability of the Corsair airframe, and the absolute will to complete a mission. The ultimate unexpected twist of Klingman's legacy lies not in the trophy of a single kill, but in its symbolic power. His story transcends the individual act to represent the entire ethos of the Pacific Air War, the relentless pressure to protect the fleet, the willingness to push machinery and human endurance beyond all limits, and the quiet humility with which the greatest heroes often return to a normal life. When Robert Klingman passed away in 2004, he was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. His true legacy, however, is enshrined in the enduring legend of the Corsair propeller attack, a story that continues to inspire, reminding us that courage can forge a weapon from anything, even the very tool that keeps you aloft.